Alright, hi, my name is Jordan Booth. I am a finishing up third year, rising fourth year graduate student here at the University of Michigan. And so I'm a synthetic organic chemist that works with Dr. John Wolfe upstairs. And so in terms of what got me interested in chemistry, would be when I attended community college and a lot of the laboratory courses that were offered there. We had lots of really cool lab demos, and a lot of those were directly related to real-world applications. And so applications in the real world, thought, perfect, that's the job for me.
I'm Ginger Schultz. I'm a postdoc here at the University of Michigan, and I research chemistry education. And what was the other part? What got us interested in chemistry? So when I was an undergraduate, I wanted to get a degree in hydrology, and I took general chemistry as a prerequisite for some of the courses I needed, and basically defected to chemistry because I really liked thinking about really clean models and applying those to new situations, and then also the really visual aspects of thinking about molecules.
I'm Beth Taylor. I'm a lecturer at MIT, and my graduate work was in bioorganic chemistry, but then I came on as a lecturer, but also somewhere involved in curriculum development. And I first became interested in chemistry because I was pre-med and I was going to go to medical school, which I was going to do because I loved science, but I thought I wanted to help people, and that was what I thought was the only way that could happen. So when I started taking chemistry, I just loved it. I switched from bio major to chem major, and then I realized, oh, you can go to graduate school, and there are other ways to help people other than being a doctor in the lab. That was seeing the real-world applications of chemistry. So that's where my interest first started, and that's one of my biggest interests in conveying to the students as well.
Hi, I'm Rachel Merzell. I'm a finishing second year, rising third year in the graduate program here. I work for Mark Banizak Hall. I am technically in the inorganic cluster, but I work on protein nanoparticle design and drug delivery, so take that how you will. And I got interested in chemistry actually in high school. I had a really fantastic high school chemistry teacher, and I sort of never left. So that's how that started.
Alright, so my name is Susu. So my full name is Sudarat, but people just call me Susu for short, and I'm a third year graduate student going to fourth year in fall. I work in Professor Stephen Maldonado's lab. So in the lab, we do solar cells. So what my job is, I make nanomaterials, nanowires, semiconductors, and then apply it in photoelectrochemical cells. It's very different from what I'm going to tell you about today. So what really got me into chemistry is that when I was undergrad, being poor and need some extra allowance, so I work as a demo master assistant. So what we do is we have this demo lecture. Professor can request different demos, and my job is to set it up. And then during my free time, I also will follow my boss to go around the school in the region. I was in Indiana, so in the region to do demos for the middle school and high school students. So what really got me interested is the excitement that I see from their eyes when they see the demos that we do. So I thought if we can do this idea and then translate it into undergraduate curricula, we can actually get more people get excited in chemistry. So that's how I got into this thing.
That's great. So you're all here today to talk a lot about how you redesigned the lab and the process that went into that. So the next question is, what did you do to change the lab? Why were you inspired to do it? What did that look like? But just as another note, this afternoon, the 4 people other than that are actually organizing the labs that are going to be the hands-on sessions. If you didn't sign up for one, or if you're interested in a different one, talk to Rachel. And there's still space, we can move things around. So just keep that in mind as you're hearing about what's going on in the department. So do you want to start with something?
Okay, so I am gonna work. So for this afternoon, I'm part of the D, which is design and analysis of a microfluidic system using agar in this chemical analysis. So you're gonna hear about more about microfluidics. So this whole project started I would have to say, in the course it's 244 analytical lab. So Professor Mike Morris started to say, well, in the traditional 242 analytical lab, people do titration, but it's not quite relevant in today's world anymore, and it's kind of outdated. So how can we reform the lab so that we can get introduce the student into more modern technology such as microfluidics? It has been a thing for the last 10 years. So they decided to add in this component into the lab, and then they started that. So when I came in as a GSI, a traditional GSI in the lab, I learned that they had some problem making the chips. So I'm like, well, why don't we try something different using agar, maybe because it's clear. And it turned out to be working a lot better than before. So I taught the class for 2 semesters consecutively and then help implement this new design with agar. And then I left and to go on to my research. And then Kevin Ileka came in as an FFGSI, and then we decided to actually officially reform the lab. So so in this afternoon, we will try to showcase you guys how we change the lab into a more hands-on work, and where you can design the chips the way you want it, using everything like very simple, like coffee stirrers, and it's all macro skill that you can see and touch. And then how we flow in the liquid to monitor the fluid flow, the dynamic of fluid flow, and the turbulent and laminar. So you're gonna learn more about it if you join the lab in the afternoon. So I don't know, what else should I?
That was a nice pitch.
Oh, yeah, remember D, that is the data of the experiment. So I'll pass it to Rachel. Okay.
Cute. What am I supposed to do?
What is the lab redesign and how yeah. What and why?
What and why? Okay. So I am, let's see, it's session B, introducing group meeting style discussion to organic chemistry 1 laboratory. So I started with this, I was actually not an FFGSI, but I was really interested in getting involved in chemical education. And this organic chemistry 1 laboratory is Chem 211 here, and I had taught it my first year as a GSI. And so I had seen how it currently is and some of the challenges associated with it. And so I actually just approached Professor Ann McNeil and said, I hear you're working on this project, can I join you? And she said, sure, come on board. So we've spent the last, I don't know, 8 or 9 months, almost a year now, working on redesigning Chem 211 or Orgo 1 lab. And so we have this really new, interesting lab design, I think it's really innovative and interesting. We are doing 3 3-week modules, in which the first week is a basic experiment where I can talk to you more about it later, but we're introducing some sort of variable change that is carried across the class. So different groups will be doing the same experiment, but with different, they'll each have a different variable. So like temperature, or maybe they'll have a different substrate or work at different concentrations. And then the 3rd week, we take them into the lab, and there's actually no wet chemistry. They're going to do data analysis. We're going to pull all their data across the class, and we're going to have some sort of guided analysis process in which we're going to try and essentially get them to the answer on their own using all this data that they've collected across their different sections. And then the 3rd week is they're going to take what they've learned and turn it into a challenge week. So they apply what they've learned to some sort of challenge experiment that they're going to have to propose their own hypothesis for, and then carry forward this experiment. So that's the basic outline. I can talk to you more later about how we've gotten to this point and a lot of the thought process that went into it. And so if you're interested in learning how we're going, sorry, what? No, I just like. Oh, okay. So if you're interested in learning how, we're going to model the 2nd week for you. So you're going to get a lot of data, and we're going to walk you through how we would have the class go through this and the discussion process and what we're hoping to then inspire them to do in the 3rd week. So you'll get to actually do what the class is going to do in their quote-unquote discussion week.
Great, so, oh yeah.
Oh,
So I'm not doing
it.
There's nothing to offer you. But a few years ago at MIT, there was a push and kind of an official project moving forward to reform all of the chemistry labs which are modular. Most of them are a third of the semester or 2/3 of the semester, to make them more research inspired. So specifically to bring in some of the exciting research that's going on in the chemistry department and make those connections between the chemistry that the graduate students are doing as graduate students and the chemistry that they are as TAs sharing with the students. So specifically this afternoon, I'll be talking about what we've done in the biochemistry lab, and we've actually made connections to some industry research, which is the main problem that ties the whole 2/3 of the semester is investigating drug resistance to a cancer drug VBAC, and they basically do all of the techniques under this kind of overarching problem. So they get to do a little bit of a deep dive into a specific research problem while they're learning all of their techniques. So again, I guess come this afternoon, just kind of early, you'll hear more.
So the project that I've been working on is, it's around a curriculum model that is focused on authentic synthetic problems. So all of the curriculum is around that. We've used it in 2 different courses, the Orgo 2 lab, and then also an upper level organometallic synthesis lab. And so the problems basically are used to refocus what might be a traditional lab, kind of a cookbook lab in the Orgo 1, and then in the upper level lab, we've actually based it on authentic problems that are happening in a faculty member's research lab. So we've done it at both levels, and we've been successfully doing it for the 2nd year now, and it seems to be going pretty well. But some of the things that are ongoing that we're trying to improve are thinking about this sort of tension that happens when students are directing where they're going to go is, between how much support do you give them and how much do you let them kind of proceed on their own, and so there's a real balance there. So the session this afternoon, which is session C, is mostly about how we scaffold that process instructionally. So if you come to that session, it's going to be really awesome. You'll walk away with some instructional strategies for how to help students in that process, and also with an idea for how to adapt the problem to a traditional lab. And then as an added bonus, we have bracelets that everyone who comes in.
Whoa. I see how it is. So I'm going to be session A, which is tailoring the upstairs research for downstairs learning in general chemistry laboratory, somewhat inspired by some of the other projects that we've seen. So this project is definitely a bit on the in its infancy side. So about 3 weeks ago, I was approached and asked if I would like to help design a general chemistry lab that would bring upstairs research to the downstairs teaching labs. And so our general chemistry population, there's definitely a very high percentage of true freshmen. And so we wanted to design a lab that would be something that would be accessible to them in terms of technique and difficulty and safety concerns and everything, and try and marry that with one of the branches of research that we do have some of going on upstairs. And so we settled on the synthesis of titanium oxide and zirconium oxide nanoparticles, following a prep that utilizes multiple different template materials to grow your nanoparticles on. And so hopefully the idea is that would be something that with one prep would be pretty universal in terms of the actual instruction, but by changing multiple different variables could leverage our numbers in terms of large enrollment of our classes and turn the large enrollment class into a benefit for us for collecting multiple data points.
And that was session A.
And that's session A. Yeah. And we are very encouraged by any feedback about the lab, because we're definitely trying to get it into a state where we could pilot that in either summer, I think the summer session that's coming up, because it's a much smaller enrollment and would be an easy fit.
So that's covered the what and the why a little bit for these labs, but I think the biggest challenge is the how. So like what actually goes into the entire reform process beginning to end, and I think the first steps are always the most challenging. So what does that process look like for each of these labs? So George, you want to start?
Yeah, so this process was definitely, first off, kind of, okay, what techniques do our true freshmen learn what types of safety issues do we have. Obviously, there could be enrollees that have never stepped foot in a wet lab before, so we need to ensure that we have something that is definitely accessible, would be amenable to some changes. And so the first stop was multiple colleagues in the department, because I realized as a synthetic organic chemist that a lot of the labs that I would think of to do very immediately would be a little higher level in terms of purification techniques. And so I also did some brief perusing of Journal of Chemical Education to see, okay, I know that we can do UV vis in terms of getting some initial measurements for students. I know that students have a lot of kind of dump and stir type of reactions, and so I was speaking with many of my colleagues. So I was actually up in the Maldonado lab speaking with Eli. I was in the Bartlett lab speaking with both Charles and James or Jimmy, and we ended up settling on, ultimately when I spoke with Jimmy, the idea of titanium oxide and zirconium oxide in terms of application, because titanium oxide nanoparticles have been investigated for things anywhere from LEDs to solar cells. So process-wise, tons of going through literature, looking at reasonable preps, looking over reviews, and then the ultimate part, which was, hey, I'm not a materials chemist. Jimmy, what do you think of this prep? Does this look feasible?
So my process began, so I was actually a teaching postdoc before I had started my current position. And so I was teaching the Orgo 2 lab for a number of consecutive terms. And after about the second term, I started to feel a lot braver that I could try some things on my own, and also sort of dissatisfied with the way that it was going. So I began a process of tinkering where I did also look in the literature, and I wasn't really excited by anything I saw there. And a lot of the exciting things that happen in introductory labs were reported in the literature in general chemistry. There isn't quite as much in Orgo. So I just sort of started tinkering, and what to me was really important about that phase of bringing this curriculum forward was the involvement of graduate students who were teaching the course with me. So there was a lot of conversations and sort of information gathering. So let's try this out, and you're the people who are actually present in the lab, so give me some feedback about how this is working with the students and how we can improve it. So that was sort of the initial phase. And then last year, I worked with John Wolf, who taught the course, and which allowed me to be on the outside and collect a lot of data, audio recordings and that sort of thing, to see how it was actually going. And so that was our first implementation on a large scale. And so we did one of the large, so there's 3 large lecture sessions. It was only this model, and the other 2 were just traditional, so that we could compare them. And it's been ongoing for the next year. And so now it's a lot of refinements and thinking about how the instruction works. And then in terms of the second lab, once I got this going in the Orgo 2, I started working with Professor Simchak, who teaches the upper level synthetic lab, in considering what makes a good problem. So we really developed that for the Orgo 2, but what makes a good problem for an upper level lab, and how also do we connect that to research. So we worked together on that and piloted it 2 years ago fall, and then did it for the second time this fall, and did a lot of the same data analysis. So that was really one of the really great things about working with someone who's willing to teach the model, was it allowed me to spend a lot more time assessing it.
So the way that things started for me in the biochem labs at MIT is, as part of kind of this process, the department had decided for reinvigorating all of the labs, faculty members were given essentially a semester off from teaching to be responsible for developing individual modules, and then they could kind of organize that however they wanted. If that meant working with graduate students or postdocs, it was sort of there was not this overarching structure for how they individually needed to do that. With the biochem, interestingly, the professor that did receive the semester off didn't have quite the resources to finish that on her own. And at that time, I'd been hired by Professor Kathy Drennan to work on a bunch of projects with her under this HHMI professorship she received for bringing interesting applications into freshman chemistry. And it seemed like this fit like something I could do. So really, I think one of the challenges that we might be getting to also is, and I feel like here you've solved it really well with these FFGSI positions, is finding someone that has a little time to really dive in and work on the lab. So it just went to me, you need to redo the biochem labs, and I had Kathy to work with, and eventually graduate student as well who's going to be running the labs. But in terms of the topic, really what I just did was dig into literature, and I had just gotten my PhD, not at all having stepped into education yet, so it didn't even occur to me to look into like the Journal of Chemical Education. I was just looking in the literature for cool stuff. I knew we wanted a kinase, so I was looking into kinase literature, and then afterwards stepping back and thinking about the educational part of it. So first we were looking for this cool overarching problem, and then we kind of went backwards from there.
Okay. So, so for our process, well, first I should start, okay, so our process, we started thinking first about sort of the structure of the lab and the lab design. We read a lot of papers both on experiments and also on ways that different universities of this scale or slightly smaller have modeled their labs and some of the reforms they've done. So that was sort of the first thing we settled on was how do we want to structure it? And as I talked about before, we eventually settled on this 3x3 model. So it's 3 3-week modules throughout the semester. And then we started talking a lot about how we wanted to have sort of a simultaneous conversation of pedagogy of it. So it would be sort of guided and inquiry-based, and we didn't just want to stick with cookbook labs. And tied into that was what we wanted our evaluation process to be. So what kind of assignments would they do? Would they do worksheets? Would they do pre-lab? So that was, we did all of that sort of scaffolding of the lab structure before we even really delved into designing the experiments themselves. Which actually I think was very beneficial because we sort of got the outline and then we could fit in what we wanted. But with that also, you know, comes the challenges. A lot of our challenges that Jordan talked about are mirrored for us. So we have the problems of scale and time. So in designing these experiments, we have to think about the safety, what reagents can they use, can't they use. We want to have a lot of real world applicability. So if we want to do, you know, we had an idea that they could, for example, isolate soap from milkweed. Well, we have to get milkweed for 1,400 students. It's probably not feasible for, you know, semester after semester. So, or if you're isolating something from pine needles, well, also not really feasible on large scale. So a lot of that goes into the design of these experiments. We also had to be cognizant of the fact that it's a 1-credit class, so we read all these really cool papers on cool writing assignments they can do and did a lot of research on peer review and had all these really great ideas, and then realized it's a 1-credit class and they can't really be expected to do that much. So there were a lot of challenges associated with that we're still grappling with. But I think we're happy with where we are, and we're working through the actual experiment design, and so that's sort of been our whole process from start to where we are right now.
So my case is a little bit different. Instead of revamping the whole entire lab course, our case for this analytical lab, it is basically a highly quantification lab. So microfluidics is one of the lab of the entire lab course. So when I came in 2013 and 14, I taught the class. Before I learned from Professor Hawkinson, which was the instructor of the class, that there are very obvious challenges that they got when they started to implement microfluidics into the first lab. So what happened was, the problem was they used a paper from the JChem app, which they used Jello as the mold to make the agar. And what happened with Jello is it's really sticky. It takes a while to solidify, and it has color. So later on they changed to use the clear gelatin, but they couldn't get the ratio right and the consistency right to make the mold very sturdy. So when I came into the class as a GSI, I was like, well, have you ever thought about agar, since everyone uses agar in cell culture? And they were like, oh, well, that's actually a great idea. It solidified really fast. So we started, when I taught the class, I implemented changing all the jellos to agar, and it worked actually really well for the students, but there are some, mostly the fabrication process that are a little bit tricky to work with. And so I left to go on with my research. And then Symposium, University of Michigan started to have this FFGSI program. And the FFGSI that was in charge in this course is Kevin. So Kevin, when he was officially the FFGSI, we thought about actually teaming up and have this reforming official, right? Yeah, so he is at the back. So make it official. And so what we did was we actually revamped it. So we keep the agar as the base for the mold, but we actually changed the process of the fabrication. So we make it easier and make it more reproducible and basically foolproof for the students to make it. So we actually implemented the course already, this lab in the past semester. And before the class started, we gave them a survey and wanted to see how they know, how familiar they are with microfluidics. And then we gave them a survey after the experiment as well. So I read through the survey, and it seems to be they learn a lot. The numbers from strongly disagree go to strongly agree. And then they also give us some feedback of the lab. So mostly the process will be the time they invest into the fabrication process, and then wish it to be they wish us to cut it down to a shorter time. So in that case, I do not have the problem of students not very familiar with lab work, because this quantitation class, the analytical chemistry in this university, they are all upperclassmen, so most of them have research experience and also have some lab background already. So it's very, for me, it's a little bit more straightforward to introduce the concept to them. And then right now, we already have the survey and feedback from the students, so the next step we're going to do is to actually really integrate what the comments into our next design, which make it even more straightforward and cut the time in half, and hopefully also want to reduce the size of the chips from a giant scale down to a even smaller scale, more closely towards the application side.
Okay, so I have one last question, then we'll open it up to the floor. But what was one of the biggest challenges you ran into throughout this process of reforming a lab? Do you want to start us off?
So I think the challenges will be this lab involve a lot of craft work. So they have not a lot of people has a lot of experience with doing craft work. So I think that part will actually it was our challenge to get all the little details right, and also it was our challenge to convey the details in form of words to the student, so that they get the idea how to do this tiny little trick that will actually change the entire outcome of the experiment. That was our challenge to actually get the student to love that the fabrication process. But yeah, we got a feedback, as I mentioned earlier, so we are working on improving that. Yeah, good.
So one big challenge that I think is reflected across all of this is for these interlabs is the scale and the numbers, and that's just sort of, it's a blessing and a curse, right? We get a lot of data, but we have to work with 1,400 to 1,800 students a semester. But I think for our redesign, there are a number of challenges that are more specific to us. So one thing that we thought a lot about was the physical space. If they're doing a sort of group meeting style discussion their second week, it would be great to do it in a conference room or in a classroom, but with 1,400 students, we have to modify it so that it can be done in the lab, because we actually just don't have the physical space to carry it outside of the actual wet labs. So we thought about that a lot. We also, with this group meeting model, it's very dependent on GSIs being able to guide the discussion effectively and convey the necessary information. So we've spent a lot of time thinking about the lab design and the materials we're going to provide throughout each module to try and hopefully minimize and mitigate problems with GSI variability, and making sure that the students are guided enough, but that they're not given wrong information. And so we've been very cognizant of that. And this is an entirely new way of designing this lab. And so we've also thought a lot about professor sustainability and transfer, and the fact that Professor McNeil isn't going to teach this lab forever. And with this new innovation and design, how do we make sure that it's sustainable and transferable to the next faculty member who takes it over? So those have all been like challenges that are significant to us.
So thinking about it for when our lab was first introduced, it's been running several years now at MIT. I think the biggest challenge that we ran across was when we were first developing it and testing it, we were thinking of it almost two ways. One was as this overarching problem that they were solving over multiple weeks over the semester. It wasn't so chopped up into individual techniques, but then we did have the constraints of it was 2 4-hour sessions per week. So we were trying to make something flow, but flow in a way that they were just doing it in 2 4-hour sessions. So one of the challenges I think we really faced that we didn't anticipate quite so much was, I think as researchers, we're very used to, okay, you set something up, but then that's going to run for a while, so now you're setting up 3 other things, and this is all going, and we thought, great, this is a wonderful thing to practice because this is what you actually do. And I think a challenge was in making some modifications was recognizing that, oh no, they then won't understand what any of the things are because it will all be mixed up if this is the first time you're seeing it. So one thing we had to think about a lot was anytime we were, due to time constraints, having them set something up and then really shift gears, we really had to help them make that shift and plan for that shift, and again make sure they were understanding what the overall research questions were that they were addressing with these different techniques, so that it flowed for them and didn't feel chopped up due to the time constraints.
I would say the biggest problem that we've had is this mindset that students have that in order to get their A, they need to come up with that single correct answer. And we're presenting them with an open-ended problem, which by definition has multiple correct answers or correct solutions. So, how do we get them to let go of that mindset and really embrace what they're doing and sort of minimize their anxiety about their grade, such that they'll be able to really explore and even be creative about what they're doing. And then kind of the opposite side of that is that graduate students often really feel like it's their job to give that right answer. So sort of taking the graduate students from the point where letting go of that mindset and thinking about themselves as facilitating the students as they investigate themselves.
So there was a bit of issue in terms of problems that we ran up against. And probably the biggest problem that we had, kind of in addition to the size and scale issue, was actually just in coming up with the chemistry and figuring out exactly which experiments to run. I ran into the barrier of my own subject matter knowledge. So, as a synthetic organic chemist, the process of heating something in an oven at 500 degrees centigrade for X number of hours, that's not necessarily equipment that I have readily available, and how can I translate something like that into a lab that students would be at least able to do part of. And so luckily, the majority, and then there's also the safety logistics issue, and so between a couple other people who have been extremely instrumental in helping this project move forward. So Jimmy Brancho has actually been doing some of the synthetic work with me and doing some of the molecular characterization to make sure that the data sets that we would be able to gather would be reasonable and that students could take something that they knew very little about initially and be able to build some of their knowledge about that. Additionally, Phil McClory, who is also from Professor Atkinson's lab, has been a graduate student mentor, so the overseer of the GSIs, someone that is an experienced graduate student that our graduate students can then ask questions to, as well as a GSI for the 125 series. And so in terms of practicality and issues that arise, just kind of dealing with general 125 students, he's been very helpful in pointing out, we should probably do this instead. So,